learned many laws. We spoke about the law of suffix and vadai. Suffix means we're not sure if the place is clean, or vadai means we are sure that there's dirt there. And we spoke about the difference. Suffix, soya, if there's a questionable, if there is excrement, we're not sure. So then it would be prohibited to read Shema and daven. But if a person is not sure if there's urine, that would be permissible. And then we brought another version of this, and that was that if there is a suffix, if it's questionable, if there's excrement in one's house, that would be permissible. And if it's in an ashpa, in a dump, that was where it was prohibited. But if it's a suffix, a question, if there's urine, that would have been, that we said even in an ashpa, even in a dump, that's permissible. You would be allowed to recite Shema and daven there. Now, then the Gemara said that this follows the logic that urine is more lenient because, according to biblical law, urine is only an issue when while the stream is happening. But right after the stream is over, then biblically, that's not considered a problem. And basically, the point is that it's based on verses, really. The Torah says that you have to leave the camp, both to urine and for excrement. But for urine, it doesn't say you have to cover it over. So the understanding is that you would need to leave the camp because people are constantly learning and davening in the camp. So in the camp, you would have to leave. But for urine, we're not afraid because biblically it's not an issue, because outside the camp, how many people are there? It's rare that there'll be people there. So for urine, you can let it dry. But when a person defecates there outside the camp, they have to cover it. Why? Because there are sometimes people are going to be going there to think, meditate, I don't know, and they might want to learn Torah. So for inside the camp, you can't do anything because people are learning and davening and so on. But outside of the camp, that's where a person would do their needs. But for urine, we're not nervous that someone would walk by while they could wait while you're urinating while the stream is happening. But when if there's excrement there, it has to be covered over. So urine can dry. We could wait till it dries, and
Rabbi,
you don't have to cover it over.
That's all men, correct? You're talking about a camp that's all men, not women also, correct?
Well, the same laws would apply with men or women. It's excrement or urine. I mean,
okay.
it would apply. Okay, so we're talking about the camp. I mean, the verse is referring to when the Jews were in the desert, but the same laws apply, to the rules are rules. They apply in all places. Now, so what comes out is that biblically the prohibition of urine is only in front of the stream, but rabbinically, even afterwards, if there's urine there, it's prohibited to say Shema there, because there's urine on the floor. But if it's only questionable, that's when the rabbis didn't say their decree. They only said their decree if it was definite. So if it's questionable, then it's not an issue. Now, if it's definite, that's where we had the whole discussion yesterday. And that's what we concluded with, that we had two opinions. One opinion was that urine is not completely it's not an issue once it totally is dried up, once the area is dried up. But how dry does the area need to be for urine to be considered dissolved and disintegrated and no longer an issue? To what extent does it have to be dried up? That was the question of the Gemara. Again, these laws applied in the olden days. It's very rare that it would apply now, except if a person was on a hike. And if a person was hiking, and then could be an issue. So, but it was very common in the old days. So the thing is that when does urine become no longer considered urine? So we had initially two opinions, but then the Gemara ends off with a third option. The initial two opinions was it's wet enough if the ground is wet enough to make someone's hands wet, if they touched it, that would be considered that it's still a problem. It's matfiach. The term is matfichim. It can wet your hand. It can wet something. And the other term the other opinion was rishuma nicker. It's recognizable in the ground. You can see that there was some wetness over here. In other words, it's much drier. It's not going to wet your hand if you touch it, but you can see a darker shade on the ground, on the sand, that you can see that it was wet. That would be an issue. And then those were the two opinions that we were dealing with. And Geneva said this view that it has to do with rishuma nicker. It has a mark. You can see on the ground a certain mark. That's a problem. And Rabbi Yosef didn't like that Geneva said this opinion because he tried to prove that it can't be a valid view of Rav. Geneva said in the name of Rav, and Abaye sticks up for him and says, "What do you mean? There's another view in the name of Rav that fits with it." And so there is room to say Geneva's opinion. And yes, Robert. I can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. I got it. Thanks. But with all of this meticulousness, when we've been reading everything, and I really appreciate that, even in contemporary times, when urine is dried up, there is a distinguishable and I'd say distasteful aroma of urine that lingers. So I'm just concerned that, just because it's evaporated doesn't mean that it's gone. That's all.
Yeah, that's a good question. To what extent, in other words, where do we draw the line of what is considered a bad smell? Because the earlier Gemaras did talk about a bad smell. And I'm not sure to what extent that, where you draw that line. I know if it's really bad for sure, that's definitely a no-no. But if it's, if it's a slight smell, maybe it's not considered an issue. Yes.
See, what's distinguishing from olden times to these times is that they did not have paved sidewalks or parking lots, all right? So it was absorbed and then finally goes away. But we all know that if we walk in a parking lot or somewhere, it's a hard surface and it essentially evaporates, but the after odor is pretty offensive.
But what you're saying, Robert, is really that you're saying that it really is a bigger problem nowadays than it used to be in the olden days, because it doesn't even get absorbed fast. It takes a long time to get absorbed. So in other words, it's actually a bigger problem today, and it is an issue because often you'll park in a parking spot and you can smell that the previous person who parked there, urinated there must have been a few minutes ago.
Whomever it was, relieved themselves, or a vagabond or somebody.
Right. Someone just used this
had to
as a urinal.
So anyway,
anyway, it is an issue. And you parked there just to daven mincha because the sun was setting. Right. And and you're parked there. Yeah. So
it's like all the men who on the way home, off of the highways, park in the rest area to daven, and, what are you confronted with, right?
You're right.
That all the time.
You got a good point. There is a practical side to it. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Someone else had a question.
Yeah.
No, Susan, yeah.
Well, I've refused to go in some of the STS cars because of the odor.
Oh, wow.
Seats are not wet. They're not wet, but
there is a smell.
It's an after lingering odor.
Lingering. It's awful, and it's not poor people's fault.
Yeah, but Susan, we can't get involved in it. Yeah, we're very tight with time, so also every time is precious. Okay, so basically, the Gemara's conclusion, the Gemara had a contradiction because the Gemara had well, not a contradiction. The Gemara asks, maybe there's a machlokes tanoim in this scenario because we have these two opinions, and there is a brisa that's very vague. And because the brisa is vague, maybe we should say that these are the two opinions in the brisa, meaning the brisa doesn't explain itself well, but we know there's two opinions about reciting Shema opposite urine. And there's an opinion of Rabbi Yossi and an opinion of the Tanakama. There's a first opinion and an opinion of Rabbi Yossi. And the problem is their statement is a little unclear. What does it mean to be absorbed? If it's absorbed, you could say Shema. If it's not absorbed, it's usher to say Shema. What does absorbed mean? How absorbed is it? It doesn't say. And then Rabbi Yossi is even more unclear. He says, as long as it causes wetness. Now, as long as it causes wetness, it's permitted, or as long as it causes wetness, it's prohibited. Like, what does he mean? And how much wetness? So the Gemara says, maybe let's say that this is the argument. One of them is talking about the opinion of if it's still recognizable on the ground. And the other one is of the opinion, no, that it's not, it doesn't have to do if it's recognizable on the ground. It has to do if it would cause someone's hand to get wet. That would be considered an issue of urine. And if it wouldn't cause someone's hand to get wet, it wouldn't be an issue of urine. So that would be the two opinions. We would have Rabbi Yossi's opinion that as long that if it's wet enough to make someone's hand wet, that's a problem. If it's not that wet, then it's not an issue. That would be Rabbi Yossi. The Tanakama said it depends if it's absorbed. And the way we're understanding it, that it's so absorbed that you don't even recognize on the ground. That's the way the Gemara is thinking, that this argument that we have, which is really the Amoyroim from the rabbis of the Gemara, maybe this was really an argument of the Tanoim because we have a brisa that fits out. Now the Gemara's answer is the Gemara is going to answer that that no, that's not what we're dealing with. And let's start from that answer. I'm going to start on the top line on page Chaf Hey on base 25b. So this is exactly where we're holding. We have the question of the Gemara is that maybe the argument of the Brisa is the exact argument that we mentioned in the name of the Amoyroim, in the name of Rav. Maybe that specific argument is really the Brisa. And the Gemara says, no, that's not. The Brisa is arguing about the following law. Vahacha, and here in the Brisa, what they're dealing with is not about Rishuma Nikar, if it's recognizable on the ground or not. It's about it's about wetness to the extent that not only will it make something else wet, like your hand that touches it, but it'll make your hand so wet that even if you touch a third item, in other words, even if you touch something after you touch this, now your hand is wet. And now you take your hand and you touch a third item, that item will also be wet. So that's the extent of how much wetness it has to be. Now, Rashi says one pshat here, and that is that the Tanakama holds that you need, he says it needs to be wetness enough that it'll make your hand wet. That's the Tanakama's view. That if it makes your hand wet, not only that your hand is wet, but it's wet enough that your hand would make something else wet from it. It's so wet, it's the liquid is very visible. There's a lot of liquid. That would a lot of wetness. That would be considered that would be when it's prohibited to say Shema. But if it's only wet enough that your hand will get wet, but your hand won't be wet enough to get something else wet, then you're allowed to say Shema. You'd be allowed to say Shema. But Rabbi Yossi is more machmir, and he says no, that it has to be so wet that it would make your hand wet. I'm sorry, that any wetness, if it would make your hand wet, that's prohibited already to say Shema. So that's the two views. Now I should mention that the Rambam learns it the exact opposite. The Rambam translates it the exact opposite. And the reason, the issue that they're all dealing with is one issue. The reason why there are different views over here is one issue. The issue is that Rava tries to give a summary. He says, Hilchasa, this is the halacha, which means that Rava, after learning all the different opinions, Rava said the Hilchasa is Meiraglayim Kolzman Shemat Pichem. Rava said all the time that it would cause wetness. That's when it's considered urine. If it doesn't cause wetness, it's not considered urine. Now, the problem is Rava's statement, who's giving the halacha, should follow the general view. It should not follow Rabbi Yossi. So they're all trying to figure out, all the commentaries are the different opinions of how to read the Gemara. They're figuring out how does Rava fit with this final Gemara, because it sounds like his opinion might fit with Rabbi Yossi. So in order to answer that problem, how does he not fit with Rabbi Yossi? So you either have to explain that Rava is saying kol zman shematpichen, that it's teifeach al manas lahatfiach, that he's not clearly emphasizing the full extent of his law, but he doesn't clarify it in words. But what he means is kol zman shematpichen. In other words, this expresses itself in halacha. The difference, the halacha actually is based on this statement of Rava. So how does, and then you have to take that, it has to fit with the general opinion in the Gemara. It can't just be a singular view, because Rava would not have followed a singular view if there's a majority of rabbis that argue. So we're trying to fit, so that's what the rabbis are dealing with, and that's how the halacha, at least the way the Rush and actually it's an argument, I should say. The Rambam holds one way and the other Poskim hold the other way. Is it have to be how much, the two opinions is how wet is urine considered, when does it still considered urine? Does it have to be wet enough to make your hand wet? That's it? Or does it have to be wet enough to make your hand wet, that your hand would be wet enough to wet something, another item? That would be the argument. Anyway, but it's based on this issue. I'm not going to go into it because I don't know if everyone wants to go into the depth, but I'll just leave it at that. So now the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says, Yorad ikabina Yorad litpalim yachalawas. This is a Gemara that we learned. This is a Mishnah that we learned a while back. The Mishnah said that a person is a Balkari and he goes to the mikvah. And this Balkari, he goes to the mikvah, and the problem is he might not have enough time to get up before the sun rises to dry off and get out, go up from the mikvah and until the sun rises. So he's got an issue with saying Shema, and he's naked. So what should he do? So the Gemara, the Mishnah said that no problem. If he can get up and cover himself, get up from the water, go up from the water and cover himself, fine. And if not, what does he do? He can say the Shema in the water. He's let me read the actual words of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said, this was on page Chav Beis Amud Beis 22b, that if he could get up and cover himself and say Shema before Netzach Hamad, before the sun rises, he should do it. If not, he covers with water and he says the Shema, And then it says he shouldn't cover himself with dirty water, bad water, and water that's used for flax. Bad water means smelly water. May mishra means water that's you soak flax in. And then it says until he puts other water in it. And how far should he separate from urine and from excrement? Dalet amos, 4 amos. So it says that there's an option of he's trying to say Shema before Netzach Chama. That's really what we're dealing with. And he has 2 options. He either covers himself, he goes up from the water and covers himself, or covers himself with the water. Okay, these are the 2 options. But the main point that Gemara is going to talk about is that he's in a rush because it's sunrise. Now, did any of you ever hear of some rush because sunrise? Big problem. Oh, you have to say Shema, it's sunrise. Where does that come from? Just because it's sunrise, you're in a rush? I've never heard. Where do you get this? Where does we get this idea that sunrise he's got a rush to say Shema? We wait till 10 o'clock or 9:50, 9:45 now. Yes, Ruben.
It could be because from the night before, he didn't say it yet, and he wants to catch the nighttime Shema.
Huh. That would be that's interesting. That's a very interesting scenario. Really, the night Shema you really should say before Alois Hashachar, before dawn. Sunrise is really a later time, but it could be b'diavad. You might have there is such an option. So you got an interesting scenario. Good answer. You answered well. Very, very good. But that's not what we're talking about. The Gemara doesn't seem to be satisfied with that. Yes, Ezra.
Says Vayashkem Abraham Baboker. So yeah. Abraham woke up and got up early in the morning. So that's could be the connection to the Kriyat Shema.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
But that's for tefillah, right?
I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Shema is not tefillah.
No, I'm saying that's what the Mishnah is talking about, and that's what the rabbi was discussing. It says,
well, we are talking
why
about
do we get
Shema,
up to say the Kriyat Shema?
But
what's so important about that? And
well, Shema and Shemona Esrei go together. We know you're supposed to be so one is connected to the other. That's a good point, Ezra. It's a valid point because it could be that Avraham got up, Vayashkim Avraham Babiker, and the source of davening we have from the Avos Tiknum, and what's the verse? Vayashkim Elamakam Asher Omad Sham. It says he got up in the morning to the place of daven there. So that might be like a source to say daven the earliest possible, but it's called vasikin. So anyway, let's see the term in the Gemara uses is vasikin. Let's see what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Lema Tana Stama Rebbe Eliezer. The Gemara says, let's say that this Tana was Stama Sasma Rebbe Eliezer. He said a blanket a statement without a name even. It's a statement stam without a name, but he's paskening like Rebbe Eliezer. What does Rebbe Eliezer hold? The Amar Ad Hanetzachama. Rebbe Eliezer says that, you know what? You're supposed to say Shema only until dawn, until sunrise. You have to finish Shema before sunrise. So it sounds like our Mishnah is following that statement. And our Mishnah is a stam. In other words, it's like it's an absolute rule that it doesn't even say this rabbi says it. It's like makes it like it's an absolute rule, a stamma. And the Gemara is surprised because we don't paskin this way. We don't hold that you have to say Shema before vasikin. But there is such a view. We did learn it. We learned such a view. It's not the accepted halacha, but there is such a view. So maybe that's the opinion, that it's until Netzach Chama. And we follow Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara answers, no, don't worry. You really have until 3 hours. We didn't hold, the Mishnah doesn't hold like Rabbi Eliezer. Afilotem Rabbi Yeshua, bedilma kavasikin. Maybe we follow Rabbi Yeshua, and maybe it's like we could say that it follows Rabbi Yeshua, and we're talking about a case that it's like Vasikin. People who want to daven early, they want to do the mitzvahs beautifully, and the Vasikin, the pious people, they would daven, they would say Shema right before Netzach Adam. Rabbi Yochanan Vasikin, they would finish the Shema right with the sunrise, so that they could daven Shemona Esrei right by sunrise. So that is the understanding of our Gemara, is explaining that the Mishnah, that it's not saying that you need to get up and recite Shema, get out of the water to recite Shema because the time is over, but it's because you are trying to do the mitzvah in the best way possible, beyond the letter of the law. And because you're trying to do that, therefore, the Mishnah encourages you to do it. You could either cover yourself with a towel, or you could cover yourself with the water. Now, what's interesting is the Mishnah Berurah brings a proof in the Bir Halacha, brings a proof from this Gemara that if a person generally davens Vasikin, he doesn't have to go after a minyan. He doesn't have to. In other words, he's allowed to not wait for a minyan. Why? Because look at the scenario here. The Gemara is clearly saying that a person is just davening. This is very interesting. Person is simply wants to daven Vasikin, or maybe he's used to davening Vasikin, davening at the sunrise. And here, what is he? And he's in the water, and he's going to be saying Shema and Shemona Esrei. And we see from here that he doesn't even have to wait for his tefillin. He's going to say Shema and Shemona Esrei even without his tefillin, just to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of Vasikin. Now, if he could do it without his tefillin, the Mishnah Berurah says for sure he could do Vasikin without a minyan. That's the Bir Halach. So you see from the Gemara, he proves that Vasikin has a very high level is a high level mitzvah, that it gives you the permit of not even of not davening with a minyan. You have that permit. Because you're not davening with tefillin on. You don't have your tefillin, and you're going to be saying Shemona Esrei. So so that is an interesting point from the Mishnah Berurah. I'm going to continue. Yes, Susan.
Rabbi, but if you're in the water, your heart can see your private parts.
Good question. Look at the next Gemara. Now, if you can't go up, the time of Shema is right there, so you should cover yourself with water and say the Shema, right? So now the Gemara asks, Susan's question. Your heart sees.
Yeah.
If you're in water, your heart in your private area is visible to your heart. So even though you're covering your body with the water, but the thing is that your heart can see your erva, can see your private area. So Amar Rebbe Lazar says, Mishum Rabbeinu says in the name of Rav, the Mayim Achurin Shana, that the Mishnah is talking about that it is cloudy water. The Damu Ka'ara Smichta, that it's similar to thick earth. It's, in other words, it's Shalo Yira Libai Ervasai, so it's dirty. Dirty. It's earthy. So it's not your heart is not going to see your naked, your erva, your private area. Okay, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis learn, Mayim Slulin, if it's clear water, Yeshev Bahen Al Tzavarei V'Kairet. You could sit in them until your neck, or stay in them until your neck, and you could read the Shema, say the Shema. And some say that you should dirty it with your regel, with your foot. So now, what does that mean, to dirty it with your foot? So you have to understand that in the olden days, they would have earth on the it was on the earth, and you're in water that's there's earth on the bottom. So if you move your foot around, you're going to bring up earth, and you'll make it cloudy and dirt and earthy, and therefore it's not a problem. So now it says here that you sit in them until your neck. Now, why until your neck? And the answer is because for Shema, you really could get away with until your waist.
Right.
Because your waist could be above the water, but and revealed, exposed. Your heart could be exposed for Shema, we said. But Shemona Esrei, you need to have your heart has to be covered. So here we're assuming you're going to daven, so you not only say Shema. So therefore, you remember we said that you're standing before a king. Because you're standing before a king, your heart has to be covered. So therefore, here you're staying in the water until your neck, and you read the Shema. And some say Oichran Baragla, you have to make them cloudy or dirty with your feet, and this way they won't be see-through, transparent. You'll be considered covered, and it's not a problem. Now the Gemara asks, what are these two opinions? Either until your neck, or either you need to make the water dirty, or you don't need to make the water dirty. What are the two opinions? Right? Either it says v'yeshayimim. Some say you have to make the water dirty. What's the other opinion? So the Tanakama, what about the Tanakama? You don't have to make the water cloudy. So your heart sees the erva, the private area. There is an opinion that says if your heart sees the private area, it is permissible. And this first view is that following that opinion, that the heart is allowed to see the erva, and that's your eyes that can't see the erva, but your heart would be allowed to see the erva. Now, now the Gemara has an interesting question. Here you're naked, and your heels are seeing the erva. All the commentaries try to figure out what's wrong if your heel sees the erva. And Rashi here says that depending on there's two versions in this Rashi, but one version is that Rashi is talking about the heel, and he says, even though he says the word liboy, but on the side they change it to the heel. His heel is seeing the erva. Rashi says what we're thinking now is that any limb that normally doesn't see the erva, that normally doesn't see your private area, and now it's seeing it when you're saying Shema, is a problem of the lo yira b'cha ervas darver, that your body shouldn't see the private, your nakedness. And if it normally is covered and now it's not covered, that could be a problem. And here normally your legs, your heel doesn't see your private area, and now it sees your private area. So therefore, because it's right opposite it, it's right below it. If you just go straight down from your private area, that's where your heel, or the side of your heel is, and therefore it would be considered that your heel sees the erva. The Gemara answers, "Kasavar akiva reyas erva mutter." We hold that if your heel sees the erva, that is permissible. It's not a problem. The Gemara initially thought it would be a problem, and because normally it's covered, and normally it's not visible, and now it's visible. That's one way of understanding the Gemara, that akivoi, your heel, should not see the erva. Now, the question that the commentaries ask is, if the heart, if we're going to be lenient with the heart, why would we want to be more strict with the akev, with the heel? So it could be the heart. There could be your stomach sort of separates from your heart, and it's especially you have a stomach, if you have a belly, so then it sticks out, it separates from your heart. But the heel is directly under it. And so that would be another way of, explaining the difference between your heart and your heel. In other words, the first way was the heel almost never sees the erva, and now it's seeing it. That would be a problem, and that's what the Gemara thought. And the Gemara's conclusion is no. There's a problem with the With the heart, maybe, according to one opinion. Other opinion says not a problem. And of course, the eyes, your rayas erva, if you're seeing the erva, that's for sure a problem. But not your akev, not your heel. Okay, itmar. It was learned in the base medrash. Akevai rayas erva. If a person's akev sees the erva, mutter, that is permissible to say Shema. Aval nageya, what happens if a person is squatting in their heel? I guess if they're if their legs are folded, maybe. I'm not really sure the practical reason how your legs would be, your heel would be touching your erva. But if it would be touching your erva, I think maybe if a person's squatting or a person's sitting on the floor and their legs are folded, maybe. So their heel would be touching their private area. So Abaye Amar Mutter Aser, Rava Amar Mutter. So it's an argument, Abaye and Rava. Abaye says prohibited, Rava says it's permissible to say Shema in that position, even though your heel is touching. So again, we said Akev, the heel is not a problem, but that's when it comes to seeing. But when it comes to the heel seeing the erva, but when it comes to touching, that would be a problem. And the reason for this problem, the reason why it could be a problem of touching, there are different opinions in the commentaries, either because it would cause a person, if it's touching the erva, so anything touching the erva could cause it, because if it's touching the private area, it could cause to have like an erection, or it could just cause bad thoughts. It could cause her. So therefore, it's a problem to say Shema. If the whole Shema is all about loving Hashem and thinking you'd not going after your heart's desires, and your heel is touching your private area, so you're sort of doing the opposite of not going after your desires and so on. So therefore, it would be a problem to say Shema. And according to Abaye, Rava says it's permissible to say Shema. Rav Zvid says no. You got to word it a little differently. Change those statements around. Rav Zvid masni lal hashmai sahachi. Rav Zvid learned this argument between Abaye and Rava a little differently. Rav Chinna Bereid Ravika masni lahachi, and also Rav Chinna Bereid Ravika, he also learns it a little differently. Nageya, touching the erva, if your heel is touching the private area, everyone holds that that's prohibited. Raya, when it comes to seeing the erva, that's where you have Abaye who's strict. Abaye Amar Aser, Abaye says it's prohibited. Rava Amar Mutter, Rava says it's permissible. The Torah wasn't given to the angels. That there are certain things, certain leniencies, because we're human. And one of the leniencies is if your heel is invisible to your private area, that is not a problem. You can't protect yourself, to that extent. And therefore, just because you're in the water and your heel sees your private area, that is not a problem. You're allowed to say Shema like that. Let me just conclude the last statement here. V'hilchasa, the halacha is nageya aser, touching your private area with your heel would be prohibited to say Shema in such a position. Roya mutter, if a person's heel sees his private area, then it would be mutter to say Shema. Okay, yes, questions. Let's see, Ben.
Ezra was first.
Oh, Ezra. Okay, Ezra.
No, the fact that he's talking about Malachi Ashoyat is because the angels use two of their wings to cover their feet. So therefore, that's why he's saying what he's saying.
Uh-huh. Oh,
I
thought because the angels don't have erva, they don't have a private area.
No,
That's what I thought. Angels don't have
they had
genitals.
Interesting. That the two of their hands cover their feet. Interesting. Okay, interesting, Ezra. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say I can see the importance of the heart because the heart has feelings. What's the deal with the ekev now, with the heel? How important is it if the heel sees or doesn't see or touches?
Yeah, so I explained, I touched on that the heel is either because it's normally an organ that doesn't see the erva, and now it's seeing it. It's what you're doing is revealing private area to part of you that normally it's covered from. And the other explanation is that you normally have a separation from your heart. There's more room for leniency. That may be because you have a belly, but the heel is directly under your private area, and therefore it would be more of a problem.
What
There's
about
room
the
to say
knee?
that. Now, that's not the final halacha. We're just talking in
I
theory,
know. What
theoretically.
about the heel of the
Final
rest of your
halacha.
leg?
What?
What about the rest of your leg? The heel, the knee, or whatever?
Right.
Why the
That's
heel? The heel, they say, is the bottom of the human being. It's the, the least important, I would say.
right.
The least kadosh.
Right. Well, that's a good question. According to the explanation that according to one explanation, it's not a problem. Your question is really on the other explanation. In other words, according to one explanation, it's always revealed. Your other part of your leg does see your erva all the time. At least in the olden days when they wore robes, but your heel was you had shoes on. But
How about
here,
your toes? Your toes are even further away.
Further away is not a problem, but your heel is close.
Yeah, but what if the toes are touching
your private area?
Yeah.
I guess it's not so practical. I don't know how you could bend your leg that way.
It's as practical as the heel.
I think it's an
Anyhow,
example.
I'm just bringing it up.
Yeah, I think it's an example. I think it might apply to any organ that touches a person's private area.
That's more like it. Yeah.
I think it's an example regarding the regarding touching. See, it says if any of the other limbs see your private area, it's permissible. But if any of your other limbs touch your erva, it's prohibited to say Shema or daven.
That's
exactly the only thing is your upper leg where your erva lies on. So you should either cover it with a garment, or it should be it shouldn't touch.
Right.
Okay.
That I know.
Okay.
Anything, but not just the heel particularly.
Right. So it seems like that's an example with regard to touching.
Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yes, Susan.
There's in bold letters in the Steinsaltz, it says it is prohibited to recite Shema, the Torah said, and no indecent thing shall be seen in you.
Yeah, that's the next Gemara. Okay, so now we're going to continue in the next Gemara. That we're going to bring that pasuk. We're going to bring that verse. Amar Rava. Rava says, Soya ba'ashoshis. If the person sees excrement that's covered over with glass, a covering.
Lantern. It says lantern. If it's covered only by a lantern.
Right, but the lantern is either glass or something very thin. Generally, we understand it as glass. That it's covered with glass, so it's visible through the glass.
Wow.
And mutter likreis kriya shema kenegda, it would be permissible to say Shema opposite it. Why? Because it's covered. Excrement that's covered is not a problem, even though it's transparent. But erva, nakedness that's covered over with glass, also likreis kriya shema kenegda, it would be prohibited to say Shema. Tsoya ba'ashoshis mutter likreis kriya shema kenegda. Why is excrement allowed? Because it's all about covering. The tsoya b'kiso Italian also. Excrement is about covering. V'hamekasya, and it's covered. And the reason is because it says you have to cover what comes out of you. That's that verse that we were talking about in the camp when you go. But however, erva ba'ashoshis also likreis kriya shema kenegda. But erva in this covered over with this lantern, which is assumably glass and see-through, so it's usher to say Shema opposite it, and the reason why is because it says lo yerebucha ervas davar, you shouldn't see and through something transparent you could see through, so therefore it would be prohibited. Amar Abaye says, what happens if you just have a little tiny dot of tsoya? A tsoya kolshu, there's a drop, a tiny amount of excrement. Mavatla baroit, you could ruin it, nullify it with the person's saliva. Amar Rava Barak Ava. Rava says no, it has to be very thick saliva, like phlegm. That's how you could cover it over, and therefore it would be considered that it's covered over. Now Amar Rava says soya baguma. If there's excrement in a hole, let's say you're outside and there's a hole in the ground and there's excrement in the hole, you want to daven over there. So maniach sandalay aleha, you could cover the hole with your sandal, with your shoe, and you could say shema. And the reason for that is that even though the shoe, in a certain sense, is batel, is nullified to the body, so it's almost like your body is there, but nevertheless, it's not considered, we don't consider it fully like your body. We do consider it like a separation to your body in this scenario. And therefore, a person could say Shema. Ba'a mar berei de Ravina. Soya dvuka b'sandlei mai. So then the son of, the grandson of, the son of Ravina. He asked Rava, he said, what would be the law then about soya if there's excrement that's attached to your sandal, that's stuck onto your sandal, or maybe you stepped on it? So what would be the halacha? What would be the sandal? It's touching your shoe. What's the halacha? Because in a certain sense, well, obviously we're talking about that there's no smell, but the question is, would you be allowed to say Shema? Because the sandal, is that considered a separation between your body and the tzaya? Would it be considered covered over? And the Gemara says, Teku, this is an answer. This is a question that we don't know the answer for. So basically, don't do that. Don't say Shema like that, because the question that Tishbi Yataret Kushias V'Bayis Tishbi Eliyahu Navi is going to answer these. That's what it stands for. Teku, that we don't know the answer for this question. So we're not sure if that would be considered a covering, because really the shoe has a certain, you lean on the shoe, the shoe is considered maybe part of the body to a certain extent, and therefore it's almost like your body is touching the the excrement. So it could be a problem. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, so now we're going back to the nakedness. What happens if a guy is naked? So if a guy is naked, would it be permitted or prohibited to say Shema? But the point that the Gemara is making is that we find that the law is by animals. Animals, are you allowed to say Shema in front of an animal's nakedness? Animals don't wear clothes. Do we find a person has a dog, a pet dog, would they be allowed to say Shema? So or cats or whatever, there's nakedness. What would be the law? Are you allowed to say Shema in front of an animal that's naked? So what the Gemara is clarifying is, so maybe it only applies to Jewish people. So here the Gemara says this: a guy. What's the law of saying in front of the nakedness of a guy? So so the Gemara says, "Aser likras kriya shema kenegda." It's prohibited. My area of kechavim afilu Yisrael nami. What's the difference of a guy? Why does he pick this law about a guy, even a yid who's naked? The same law would apply. You're not allowed to say Shema in front of someone else who's naked. So the Gemara says, Yisrael pshitaleyu. For a Jew, we know that you can't say Shema in front of another Jew who's naked, but the Aser is prohibited. Elo ovid kechavim it's strichale, but a guy it needs to tell us, to clarify, because it's not a blanket rule, nakedness. There's you see that animals are that it says that it does compare goyim to donkeys, that the flesh of the donkeys are their flesh. So ema kachamor be'almahu, I would think they would have the same law as a chamor, as a kamash balan, the inhu nami ikru erva, that their erva, their private area is considered erva, and therefore the chsiv, as it says, by Noach, who wasn't Jewish, erva be'ervas avihem loyrohu, they didn't. So it brings a proof in the Torah that it's considered erva. Okay, then the Mishnah said, v'layis kasa. Let me just clarify one thing. So our Gemara emphasized that you have to shake, you have to make cloudy the earth. I did find something interesting in the Mishnah Brura, and I mentioned it a while ago. I think this is what he means. The Mishnah Brura brings down that what happens if you are inside, not an earth container with water, not on the earth, that there's water, let's say in a in a river or something. We're not, and it's see-through. What happens if you're in a container? So the Magen Avraham holds, no, this won't apply. You can't do anything to make that water cloudy. But the Or Zarua says, even if a person is washing themselves in a gigas, in a container, shayich zeh, you could do this. So what I think he means is if you shake the water and make it cloudy, make bubbles, make waves, make it cloudy, that your erva is not visible. Now the Magen Avraham doesn't agree to this, and the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring this opinion of the Or Zarua, but the Mishnah Brura does. So it seems like there might be such a option, for in halacha to make the water cloudy with your hands. The Gemara says use your feet to make it cloudy. So that's why this, and the reason why the Gemara says that is either because that was the norm. The norm was they didn't have swimming pools in the olden days. They had rivers. So say they had little ponds and rivers. So you're in the ground. So in the ground, you could always use the norm was to use the earth to do it. But if you don't have that option, the Mishnah Brura seems to brings from this Or Zarua that I think he means that you could make it cloudy in other ways, even if you're not by the ground. Yes, Ezra.
Water, like splash.
Just 1 second, Susan. Ezra.
I think they used to have wash tubs, and if you were to wash in it, let's say with soap, the soap itself could make the water cloudy.
So maybe it means the soap. Maybe. Okay, that's an option. Okay, yeah. It's an interesting. You're right, and they did have bathhouses. I guess that's right. They did have bathhouses. So I guess they had some type of tub. I don't know what they used to keep the water from flowing out. But yeah, interesting. Yeah. I guess you're right. I guess they did. Okay, and what did you say, Sue? What do you want to say, Susan?
Making the water cloudy by with your legs, making it splashing.
Okay.
In other words, so that you can't see the bottom part.
The simple meaning is not splashing. It means bringing up earth to make it cloudy. That's the simple meaning. But I'm adding this other meaning, that this other option based on the Or Zarua that's brought by the Mishnah Brura, that maybe you could make it cloudy. Yes, Reuven.
I've been in more than one mikveh where even after you go down 1 or 2 steps, you can't see your feet. So certainly when you're submerged, it's not a problem whatsoever.
Right. Well, that's not what we're talking about. Those are no issue. Those are not an issue. Yes, Ben.
I thought that you're not supposed to read Shema in a bathhouse.
So obviously we're talking about, it's not exactly a bathhouse. We're talking about maybe it's a river. Doesn't say you can't say Shema in a river. If it's set aside as a bathhouse is one thing, but this is a river. Okay. Or it's not an official bathhouse. It's a container of you fill a garbage can with water. In the olden days, they might have done something like that. Take a bath, let the rain falls in, then jump in the garbage can. So that would be such a scenario. Okay, the Gemara continues and it says, don't cover yourself not with dirty water, which is like smelly water, and not water that they soak flax or canvas in. It smells until you put water into it. Now the Gemara asks, how much water do you have to put in to make all this water, that smelly water? How much water are you going to put in it to remove this bad, to make it kosher for saying Shema? Ella Hakikamer. The Gemara says, rather no. You know what? You have to learn it differently. Don't cover yourself not with smelly water, and not with soap water that's used for soaking. But if it's urine, which is generally just a small amount of urine, if there's urine in front of you, how much do you have to pour on it? When would you be able to say Shema? Opposite it, until you pour some water on it, then you could say Shema. So the Gemara says, okay, so how much water do you pour on it in order to purify your location? How much should you put into this how much water should you put into this urine to make it purified that it's now you can say Shema and daven? Kolshu. The first opinion is even a drop. You add a little water to it. I guess maybe that makes it not full-fledged urine, and that's considered. I'm not sure why he would say with just a drop, but that's his opinion. The first opinion is just a drop. Reb Zakkai Yomer Revius. Reb Zakkai says it needs to be a revius, which is about 3 ounces, 3 to 4 ounces, 2.9. The one opinion is 2.9 ounces is a revius. Revius means a revius halug or revius hakav. Yeah, I believe it's revius hakav, a quarter of a kav, which or is it revius halug? Yeah, revius halug. Okay, revius halug. The quarter of a lug. Okay, so revius means a quarter. So just so that's the two opinions. Rav Nachman says the argument between the Tanakama and Reb Zakkai about how much water you put in it is at the end after a person finishes urinating, how much water would you add to purify the place? What happens if you put water down before you urinate? So in that scenario, kol shein, even a drop is good enough to nullify the urine. And Rabbi Yosef says no, the exact opposite. Machlekes lechatchila. The argument between these two rabbis is in the beginning. If you put water before, how much you need to put. But afterwards, Abalim Saif, Divrei Koil, revius, everyone agrees it's a revius, it's a quarter of a lug, which is about 3 to 4 ounces, 2.9 ounces. That's afterwards, everyone agrees you need that amount in order to nullify it. I'm Rabbi Yosef l'shamir. Rabbi Yosef said to his shamish, I see the revius of the Maya. Bring me a revius of Maya. And the Gemara says, Kireb Zakkai. And the way he's explaining it, it's Kireb Zakkai. He's basically saying that you need a why did he say it goes like Reb Zakkai? Because it must be talking about it's before he urinated, and he wanted to. It's talking about before he urinated, and he wanted to follow Reb Zakkai's opinion that before you have to put a revius in order to nullify it. Afterwards, everyone agrees it's a revius. He wouldn't say Reb Zakkai. Here he's saying it's Reb Zakkai. He's following Reb Yosef's opinion of that the argument is only before, but afterwards everyone agrees revius. So he said it's like Reb Zakkai. So he's basically saying that you need a revius even before, and he's following Reb Yosef. That's basically what we see from his statement. I'm sorry. Reb Yosef is the author of that statement. Reb Yosef said that's what he did. In other words, he held this is the argument, and he told his shamish, he said, bring it to me like Reb Zakkai. Or is this a different Reb Yosef? I would guess this is the same Reb Yosef. Unless, why would the Gemara bring a story if it already said clearly? Maybe it's a different Reb Yosef. There must have been a number of Reb Yosefs, I guess. Maybe Art Scroll. Maybe Isaac, you can help us here.
Rabbi, in the Art Scroll note, it says that Rav Yosef expressed his desire to follow the stringent ruling of Reb Zakkai.
Of Reb Zakkai,
so
right?
Yosef was following.
I'm wondering, is this the same Reb Yosef as the earlier Reb Yosef right before? And it's just saying that he was machmir. I guess it is. He's just being machmir like Reb Zakkai. He said that that's where the argument is, and he followed Reb Zakkai's view. Okay, I guess it's the same Reb Yosef. I don't know if Art Scroll says there's a lot of there are a few Reb Yosef. There are some names that we have a few of, and there's 2 Rav Kahanas. There's a few Rabbi Gamliels, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiyas. There's even 2 Rabbi Yehuda Ben Beseiras. I mean, there definitely a lot of names that were repetitive, but I guess Rav Yosef must be one. Okay, anyway,
Yeah, but in the same brisa, wouldn't it? If they're talking about a Reb Yosef, the same brisa.
It's not a brisa. It's Reb Nachman said this, and Reb Yosef said that.
So,
It's a Gemara.
So in the
It's
same Gemara, certainly then.
What?
In the same Gemara.
I know, it just looks like it's a story, Reb Yosef. But and yeah, I guess it's the same one. Yeah, you're right. It flows that it's the same one. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. Rabbis learn. Rav Shel Rei. If there's a it's 11:03. Do you guys want to go a little late today? So we try to continue, and anyone have another 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Stay.
Anyone want to stay for 5 minutes, 5 more minutes?
Let's do 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. Rabbis learn. Rav Shel Rei, if a person has a vessel, container of excrement, Bavit Shel Meraglayim, or a container of urine, and this is maybe usual in a nursing home or in a hospital. They have containers. Person can't walk. If person broke their leg and they just had surgery, whatever it is. So they have a container that they give them for for the urine or to defecate. So also liquid connected. So even if that container is just the container, it's prohibited to say Shema opposite it because it's set aside, it's designated for this for this dirt. Even if there's nothing in it. Now, what about urine itself? It's prohibited to say Shema until you put water in it. How much do you put in it? The first opinion is a drop. Reb Zakkai Yomer Revius. Reb Zakkai says a Revius. And now we also learned that whether it continues and teaches whether the container, bein lefnei hamita, bein liachar hamita, whether it's in front of the bed, whether it's behind the bed, and the bed separates between you and that item. So in other words, whether it's in front of you or it's separated with a mechitza. Shimon Gamliel says lachar hamita, after the bed. In other words, if there's a separation of the bed, then koirei, person could say Shema, but lefnei hamita, before the bed. So in other words, there's nothing separating. The
rabbi, it says you could put it underneath the bed.
1 second, that's after. So it says lefnei hamita, before the bed. Okay. So einoi koirei, you cannot say Shema in front of it. So if it's before the bed, you can't say Shema in front of it. This is Rav Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion. The other opinion said whether before the bed, whether after the bed. In other words, whether there's a separation or not, it wasn't a problem opposite these containers. So then the Gemara says, Aval marchiku arba amas v'kari, but you do have to separate 4 amas. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Omer, afilu bias mea ama. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, even if it's placed in a house that's so big, 100 amas, lo yikra ad sheyotziyam or sheyenichem tachas hamita. Don't say the Shema until you take it out of the house, the room, or until it's placed under the bed. So Reb Shimon ben Elazar seems to have the most extreme view, and the Gemara now asks a question: how to learn this? The Bnei Yeshiva, the Yeshiva, the students, they asked the question: Heichi Kamer, what was Reb Shimon ben Gamliel's statement? That was the middle view here, and when he said that there's a difference between before the bed and after the bed, and one of them needs 4 amas. So what did he mean when he said you need 4 amas? So Heichi Kamer, what did he mean? Achra amita kar miyad. Did he mean that after the bed you read the Shema, you don't have to have a separation at all? If it's behind the bed, then you don't need any separation of space. You just have that separation of the bed. Or and lefnei hamita, and if it's before the bed, if it's in front of you, you separate 4 amas. You separate 4 amas and you say the Shema. That's one way. So you don't have a. Let me just mute everyone. You don't have a separation, but it's okay because your 4 amas 6 to 8 feet away. Or Dilmar, maybe Halki Kamar. This is what it means. Lachar amita, if it's behind the bed. So marchik arba amas v'kairei, all you have to do is separate or maybe what it means is after the bed, that's when you need 4 amis separation. The mita, the bed is not considered a separation, and even if it's and so even though you have a bed, maybe it's not good enough. You need 4 amis. But lefnei hamita ina klal, before the bed, if it's in front of you, then if it's in front of you, then you can't read at all. Even the separation won't help. So this is the Gemara's question. Now the Gemara brings a proof. Tashema, the Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Aimer. So the Gemara brings a proof that Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that this is another brisa. It says Shimon ben Elazar Aimer. Achar amita kari miyad, lefnei amita marchik arba amos. So we have an opinion that says that if the bed is separating, then there's no problem. You could say Shema right away. You don't have to separate 4 amos. You don't have to walk 4 amos. But if it's in front of you, there's no bed separating. If the amita marchik arba amos, you have to separate 4 amos. That's one opinion. It's Reb Shimon ben Elazar. But what we see from this is that there is such a view. Now later on, the Gemara is going to fix that view up because it's Reb Shimon ben Elazar. It's really Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. But in the meantime, the names are off. But that's the view. The view, it clarifies the view. Here, what we have is a second brisa that's saying this opinion, and it's clarifying what we didn't have clear in the earlier brisa. There was one thing that was unclear, like where does in what case do you have to separate 4 amos? In that, we just clarified that it means that when it's in front of you and there's no bed to separate, that's when you need the 4 amos to separate. Now, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, then you have the other opinion, and here it says it's Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that it's they have to wait, you have to separate, you have to put it under the bed or leave the house. Now, Bayon Ifshitalan. So you've answered our question, Masniyasa Kashin Adadi, but the 2 brisas are contradictions. So the Gemara answers, you know what? Switch the latter brisa. Epach basraisa, the latter one, you have to switch the names because the names don't fit. If you look at the names in the first brisa, in their opinion, and the names in the second brisa, in their opinion, one of them is a mistake because it says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel for point A, opinion A, and it says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar for opinion B. And here it says opinion A is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and opinion B is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So so the names have to be changed. So the Gemara says change the second brisa. The names were mistaken. That you have to switch the 2 names. Epach basraisa. I'm sorry, or change the views in the second brisa. Either way, change the name, change the view. Who says the second brisa is the one with the mistake? Maybe the first one. So the Gemara says, Man shamet le damar kule bias arba amos dami. Who's the opinion that says the whole house is considered like arba amos? That is Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Reb Shimon ben Elazar. So it would make sense that the opinion of Reb Shimon ben Elazar is the whole house is like even 100 amos. Doesn't matter. It's all like Dalet amos. And that's the opinion of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. What's interesting here is Rashi tells us that I don't know where this Reb Shimon ben Elazar's view is quoted. I've gone through the whole Shas, Rashi says, and I don't know. I can't find where it says this. And the Gilyon Hashas goes through the whole. If you look on the side, there's a Gilyon Hashas for Akiva Eger. He quotes maybe 50 different places where Rashi says, "I don't know." There's like 50 places Rashi says. In other words, you can imagine the brilliance of of both Rashi and the Rabbi Akiva Eger, who Rabbi Akiva Eger knows every single place in the whole Shas over here where Rashi says, "I don't know." Lo yadati heichani. That Rashi is like 10 lines up from the bottom, maybe 12 lines up from the bottom. Lo yadati heichani. I don't know where this opinion of Reb Shimon ben Elazar is. Okay, so we'll stop here. Amar Rabbi Yosef.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much.